We are live. I'm Eric Garland. Welcome back to Game Theory Today. Right now, the date is December 11th, 2025, an auspicious day for some of you who have been a regular viewer of mine. Today is the 9th anniversary of the Game Theory thread on Twitter, where I started talking extemporaneously with no plan about the interference by foreign actors in America's democracy, particularly in the recent election of a certain Mr. Trump. If you know, you know. I just started writing at about 2:39 in the afternoon, Central Time, and my world kind of blew up after. I've done tons of retrospectives about that game theory thread, including a recent retrospective that's on this YouTube channel about the recent revelations of the CIA's involvement in all of that the CIA had a plan for characterizing Trump a certain way to the American people, even though we don't like the CIA getting involved in elections. So torn down tweeting that thread. I needn't do so again. I'm old, but only that much into nostalgia. But I was just talking to a colleague today, a dear friend, about what this all, what resulted from all that for real, because a lot of the information has been superseded by more information that's come out. Of course, there's been the Mueller investigations. There's been a couple of presidential elections that are still contested in one way or another. So, if you look back to December of 2016 and all the revelations since then, what effect did the game theory thread really have? I think it kicked off regular people saying, hey, I have questions about national security. I have questions about what's going on. I don't feel I'm being told the truth. There's something more to this. And I stepped into that. And then a bunch of other people said, hey, I've got something to add to that too. A lot of people got on Twitter. People got on podcasts and YouTube and other things and said, there is a lot that I can add to this mix. And I think it changed democracy. I think we have yet to really see it mature all the way. I think digital democracy is something that it makes sense. This country's only 250 years old, and we keep adding new technologies like communications, telegraph, telephone, television. We've gone from horse and carriage getting around the United States, delivering mail, to more to faster technologies to get our information, plus our voting, different places to get that information about who won an election. We keep having to update what it is to rule ourselves. And, so it shouldn't be surprising that, you have platforms like YouTube that come out in 2005 and Twitter in 2008. It takes us 10, 20, 30 years to really get used to what the impact is, and for us to all describe to each other what we think is happening and go, hey, I think this is fair. I think this other thing is not fair. So, what is the impact of Twitter on democracy, and thus the game theory thread that came out 8 years into its existence? Too soon to tell. We're still figuring this all out, folks. We're still governing ourselves. This is still an experiment in self-governance. So today is just another. This is just another day in that experiment. So we have a bunch of material I want to cover today. There's still a lot of news that's out there in espionage, national security, and affecting our democracy. And it is coming in hot and heavy here. So I have a bunch that I want to cover today, such as we're going to talk some Venezuela, that country, which we had not thought of as a major threat, but has been raised up, particularly in the new Trump administration, as a major contributor to threats to the United States. I think it's all very valid, and we seem to be gearing up for a showdown with the Maduro regime. And we're going to talk more about some of the updates there. There's some updates around Jeffrey Epstein's grand jury documents coming out. I want to talk on this episode about what you might be seeing, but very specifically, what you may not be seeing because of how those orders were written, and how the judges are interpreting them. and what you can expect, and a whole bunch that you should not be expecting. And then I think soldering a bunch of this together is the prosecutions or lack thereof of former FBI Director James Comey, whose indictment was dismissed by federal court not long. It's looking like it's going to be a second indictment for Comey. So look at what all that means. It's very interesting days here in the United States, where national security, law enforcement, espionage all commingle. So I'm glad you're spending time with me today. So there's several dozens of you getting together, so I'm very excited. I'm going to try and get to your questions that you've asked on Twitter and on YouTube, if at all possible. And so this is, I'm going to be honest, this is a new day with some of this technology, and maybe a moment or two. So with me, that'd be great. I hope everyone can hear me and everything's going well. Feel free to ring in any way that seems fitting. I already have one comment. My man Ryan Gross says, "Let's jam at the end." Ryan is the CEO of Yurt Rock, and which is a leading provider of content for digital music making, all things drums and percussion. Awesome stuff. I would love to jam anytime, Ryan, at the end of this or any other time you'd like. So thank you for proving that some of the technology is working, and thank you for being here. Appreciate all that very much. So we're gonna get started on a very big news story that nobody else is really covering, and it is a particularly important story for me based on the 15 years that I spent posted up in St. Louis, Missouri, where I am not originally from. I have this year returned to the great Republic of Vermont, where I'm from. I can't tell you exactly my location, but I can show you the lair dug into the side of a mountain. That is all I'm at liberty to say. Actually, all of Vermont looks the same, so it doesn't really matter. Anywhere you go, there's only like 8 people and 3 raccoons and a moose and several cows. So I'm giving you all the information you need about where I'm at. I'm back home in Vermont and happy. And I was out in Missouri for many years. And one of the things that I was working on there professionally was a very unfortunate situation. Missouri was a hub of human trafficking, and particularly of child trafficking. And there were many, many shocking stories to come by there. And one such that came to my attention around 2021 or 2022 was a particular boarding school that was called the Agape boarding school, that was a slave and torture camp for children from around the world, not just the United States, certainly not just Missouri. There were kids being trafficked there from multiple countries. Some were adoptees who would be adopted from abroad and then brought to the United States, and then sometime in their young adulthood, they would be told that something was wrong with them, and they would be sent to Agape, where they, the things that were done to these children are so shocking that it actually challenges some of the content guidelines for YouTube and other platforms, even to describe how they were victims. Is some of the things that I became aware of through many victim stories. Several of the stories I took firsthand and reported on are some of the most shocking things that you can do to other human beings. I'll put it that way for content guidelines. But these children were trafficked to this location in handcuffs, very often driven across the country, sometimes for 24 or more hours in the back of a police car. Their parents or those responsible for them, not always necessarily their biological or even legal parents, they were essentially kidnapped very often in the middle of the night. It was made to be as traumatic as possible. They would be handcuffed, hands behind their back, and then they'd be trafficked in a cop car all all the way in one particular case from Fresno, California, all the way to Stockton, Missouri. Many of these kids, when they would get to the Agape school in Stockton, they would find it was not staffed by educators or therapists, but from jail personnel, people that had been working as jail security, and who treated them with the utmost brutality, from choking them with the electrical cords of the clippers used to the clippers used to shave their heads when they got there, to many worse things. They were then forced into labor, and they were forced to go to church, and often they were threatened with consequences if they didn't do, if they tried to tell their parents what was happening to them there. And the staff were just liars, trying to cause trouble. And this happened to thousands of kids. And this Agape boarding school story is a very intense one. And it had been going on for decades. Agape, before it got to Missouri, had actually been out in Washington State, where they were cited by the Environmental Protection Agency Criminal Division. EPA Criminal had prosecuted the Agape school in Washington State for violations of the Asbestos Handling Act, I think it was. They were having these kids remediate asbestos from construction sites without protective equipment. And so that's when they first got in trouble with the law, and they didn't like how Washington State had turned them over to the feds, so they moved to Missouri and started this ever since. Anyhow, this is one of the crazier, more terrible stories that you're going to encounter out there. And today is a very auspicious day, because it is, in fact, as near as you can tell, the first time there has been a federal conviction of a felony associated with the Agape trafficking regime. This is a woman named Shauna Gaviola, who was convicted in the Eastern District of California yesterday. Gaviola had sent her teenage son to be kidnapped by Agape personnel while, I believe, he was working at a skating rink in California. The court in California had issued an interstate protection order that this woman was not to have any contact with her children whatsoever, and particularly not move this kid anywhere else, and not have him transported anywhere. She called the Agape school in Stockton, Missouri, in particular a man by the name of Julio Sandoval, who was also prosecuted for this. And he was acquitted yesterday, and she was not. The allegations, which were proven in court yesterday, was that she conspired with these Missouri law enforcement professionals, because these guys were sheriff's deputies in Cedar County, Missouri, which is southwestern part of the state. And they drove their cars out to California with fake paperwork from Tennessee that would cover their tracks, saying they had the right to have this child in the back of their car. Not only did the Tennessee court paperwork have no validity to it, there was an active protective order from this California judge saying that kid shouldn't be touched. They ignored all that. They made these forgeries of paperwork. They had the kid thrown in the back of the car and dragged off to Missouri. Luckily, and unlike many kids, I think this was 2021 when this all happened. Unlike many kids, Blake McGee's father, Rodney McGee, pursued him, went out there and said, "You need to give me my son back," and they eventually did. I think the minor victim spent about a week in Agape's clutches there, and they released him. And I don't know what the timing was on these things, but I became aware of the Agape story, and in about September of 2022, I published a thread online based on some evidence that had been given to me by another victim. And I did a thread that I think hit around 1 million viewers about a slave trafficking ring that was happening out of Agape. I had some evidence that were Polaris leads that were given to the Department of Homeland Security that were alleging in great with great specificity labor trafficking in addition to the abuse of children. They weren't just going after, they weren't just forcing kids into construction, raising cattle, raising horses. Things are, they have entire like labor unions over and, laws with the Department of Labor involved. Generally we don't force 15-year-olds to throw up drywall and build buildings. In fact, it's the Carpenters Union that normally would be upset about that, but the Carpenters Union is a very complicated organization that will probably be the subject of future episodes of this program. Anyhow, Agape not only was labor trafficking these children, they were labor trafficking adults in. They were defrauding people to come work for Agape. They said, bring your spouses, bring your wife. It was mostly men that would be working as security to rough up these children between the ages of 13 and 18. They would be told to bring their spouses. And when they would get there, they were told they had free housing. Well, that free housing had cockroaches in it and was, these trailers strewn with straw on the ground. And they then were told that their spouses would need to work for free. Now, I don't know how many of you are constitutional law scholars here, but we have the 13th Amendment of the United States. We actually fought a war over. Let's see. Mooley Friend 4785 says 1 minute ago, slavery never left. It just went underground. Correct. As a Vermonter and one who has regained his position back in the Republic, we fought slavery. I have my grandfather's pay stub when he fought for the New Hampshire Rifles, going down there to give him what for. And seriously, this was how we were miseducated, I think. We were told the Civil War was over and that slavery was illegal. I know, it's crazy, right? Turned out that wasn't entirely true. We missed a spot, and one of those spots we missed was Missouri. Now you get further into the story of Missouri, and you find out that Missouri didn't really clarify its role in the Union until I think about a week before Appomattox Courthouse, and I think they finalized their constitution in 1865. Right exactly as the Civil War ended. And 10 years later, they rewrote the Constitution of Missouri and took out all references to the United States. And they took out all references to like racial equality. They left us a clue, guys, as to what their intentions were. Also, that when Jefferson Davis got out of prison in 1875, he took a train to Fulton, Missouri, where he gave a speech about how the Civil War really wasn't over and that the wrong people won and that the slave owners were going to win eventually. And that place, Fulton, Missouri, was exactly where Winston Churchill gave the Iron Curtain speech almost 100 years later. And finding the text of the Jefferson Davis speech is extremely hard, even if you're a state representative, like my colleague, Representative Sarah Unziger was. She had trouble getting that speech from the state archivist. She had to go to other libraries. It's very interesting, is it not, about Missouri? So 2022 is when I put up this thread in September of that year. And a couple weeks later, the federal government indicts Shana Gaviola and Julio Sandoval, who was the dean of Agape. And there have since been, I think, several dozen recommendations for all kinds of criminal prosecution of the people around Agape, as well as allied schools, because there's a network of these schools, such as the Circle of Hope Ranch that was for girls. And I've talked to people who were involved in both situations. I've talked to victims of both schools. And it's very interesting. The boys' school was designed like by some prison designer, so they had magnetic locks. You could not get out of there for love or money. The girls were allowed to walk right out the front door anytime they got sick of the abuse. And apparently the truckers had routes that they would detour off of I-70 or I-44 to go up. It was highway, and the truckers all knew that there would be teenage girls walking on that highway, and if they wanted to divert their cabs and take that girl to certain hotels in Kansas City or St. Louis, that was a thing that could make you some money. It was very, very deep. So the Shanna Gaviola situation there, she was in about 2 weeks after I read. Is there a connection to it? I don't know. It was also very bad, and people were starting to talk all over the place. And one hopes that the feds, who have jurisdiction over transnational human trafficking and interstate trafficking of children, humans, and stuff, let's hope they had an eye on it anyhow. Did I give them a but maybe? I hope so. I hope my work has impact. But then it was 3 solid years before this thing went to trial. And so, with Ms. Gaviola here, she is facing a maximum of 5 years, probably means she'll do 12 to 14 months if I had to guess, in federal prison over this. Julio Sandoval, the dean of Agape, he was acquitted, and there was some evidence that was destroyed or not available, and the jury instructions, which I think were probably very reasonable, instructed the jury to assume that some of the missing evidence, such as apparently a phone call from Julio Sandoval to the Fresno Police or the Clovis Police Department, one of the Eastern District of California police departments, it was no longer available. And the jurors were instructed to take a negative inference from it, to draw a negative conclusion. Basically, if the government doesn't have this evidence, then it was probably against their case. And that's just how these things work. So that may have gotten Sandoval his freedom. But what was super important was, one, there was established this fact that this is a conspiratorial regime to kidnap these children across state lines and send them to this place where all the allegations are in civil court so far about rape and torture and slavery, which is a pretty bad hat trick of things to do to people. It's not good, right? But this is the first time that the methods of kidnapping these kids and trafficking them across state lines to Missouri has been established as a fact, and somebody has been held criminally liable for it. Julio Sandoval will escape criminal liability over the Blake McGee case here due to double jeopardy. He's been tried for the violation of interstate protective order. However, there are reportedly thousands of victims of this organization, and this could be only the beginning. This case can also be judicially noticed in other cases. So when you make allegations in a civil suit or in a criminal suit, in a prosecution, you have the allegations that you'll have to prove at trial. And they are not necessarily taken as true, except in motions to dismiss, that kind of a thing. But if something has been established, like a conviction, you can ask the court to take judicial notice of it, to say, hey, we know this has happened. So this is the first time we've had somebody from the Agape universe has faced federal felony prosecutions. Almost all the prosecutions in Missouri from the local prosecutors have been for misdemeanors that the guys have been allowed to plead down to, and probation. Stephanie Householder, who is the one of the proprietors of the terrible Circle of Hope Ranch, she got out with time served and probation on what was, almost a limitless number of sexual assaults and slavery charges. it doesn't seem like the kind of thing that you should get probation over. So that's been very demoralizing, I think, for the victims who have, every time they step out and tell this story, these are not stories that people like to revisit. These are hard things. But now we have a federal felony on the books, and there's a sentencing hearing, April 2026. This is taking a long time, but here we are. And there's some other fun stuff as well. We'll take Shauna off the screen here. Robert Nodell, who is the former head of Missouri's DSS, was arrested on DUI and stepped back from city government. And the date's very interesting here. Nodell was actually arrested for DUI, and I don't know if it was a close call. Apparently, he was found asleep in the middle of two interstate highways in the median strip with his car side surrounded by Miller Lite cans with the car drive. And apparently his defense attorneys are saying that they want to investigate what kind of pharmaceutical interactions. He had changed his medication recently. I was like, well, first of all, you're from Missouri and drinking Miller Lite is rude. So that alone is prosecutable in Missouri law, I think. Anyhow, that was from a couple months back. But just on the day that now we have the first agape conviction, Mr. Nodell here, who went from being the head of DSS, the Department of Social Services, he dropped back and he was the head of city management for Poplar Bluff, which is down in the Ozarks. For those of you who have ever seen the Netflix television show Ozark with Jason Bateman, you know that it's an attempt at a documentary that is way too limited. It is not nearly serious enough for how bad it all is. But Poplar Bluff is kind of the capital of the Ozarks, if you will. So this guy went from being in charge of all Medicaid spending and children's division, all this. He drops back to Poplar Bluff. It was an interesting career move. But anyways, on the day that we finally get some charges that stick, some convictions, Nodell steps back from government. Perhaps we'll see him again. Who knows? But I think most important for me is that I've been working on this story a long time, and it's one of those things that it really depends on the feds, and you have to step back. When you see something like Julio Sandoval, the dean of students, he was a high-ranking guy in this trafficking organization. He gets popped on a very light charge, violating interstate trafficking. I mean, he can be prosecuted for RICO, no doubt, because it's ongoing. He can be prosecuted for violations of the 13th Amendment, no doubt. Civil rights violations. There's probably no end to this kind of thing. This is over 3 years ago. He gets prosecuted, and nobody else. There was no superseding indictment. There was nothing else that followed on. So you wonder what else might happen. 2 seconds here. I get some questions from you guys. So you look at what's happened with Sandoval, and you go, why isn't there any more prosecution here? And you have to ask yourself, how do you sustain a network like this that moves children across state lines and does horrible things to them? Who else has to support you for that? Let's say it's a much worse group of people than one would like to imagine. I know the Mexican community in Cedar County increased kind of dramatically in 2007 to 10, having talked to local sources there. Right around the time the Sinaloa and the Jalisco were really establishing their drug networks through there. I've heard it told that they may have been trafficking some meth through Cedar County. I had heard it alleged about agape at some point. I don't have substantial allegations to make there beyond rumor. I want to be very careful. But it's not a very Latino area. And people just started turning up there for no particular reason. Now, we do know that the Sinaloa do quite a bit of human trafficking. So my question is, because we're going to do some Venezuela here, for that matter, we're going to do some Epstein tonight. Do we have other people that are involved in the Agave story that are not very sacred people? In other words, was that a Sinaloa outpost? Did the Sinaloa use this, this supposedly Christian school? Was that just a front? Or, is this a group effort? These are questions that all right. It would explain to some degree why it would take so long to prosecute things that are so obviously nasty. You can't just do these things to children. There are state statutes about not forcing children into slavery or beating them or raping them. It's very rude, right? And the allegations are detailed, voluminous, heartbreaking, terrible, and people have been going on about this for years. So why did it take everyone so long? I sometimes wonder if a lot of what's going on, like maybe we're facing more of a league of bad guys that are very serious in nature, and prosecuting one, you kind of got to take the whole thing down, or you're going to just have some of the same problems. I'm not sure. But it's a great day. We got the first federal felony conviction of somebody associated with Agape. I would have loved for it to have been Julio Sandoval. I wasn't in the courtroom, and I don't know what evidence was presented. I just read the jury instructions, so I think there's some explanations there. We shall see. So we're going to move on to some other stories. I want to check some of the questions. It is so great to see so many people. I'm so very pleased. Thank you so much. Got my man UK Neil says, hey Eric. Hey Neil, what up, bro? In Northern Ireland. Good to see you. My friend says, I see no laws followed anymore. Well, I lived in Missouri. That was something I typed to people on a daily basis. Rogue Cow says, aren't cocaine buyers, I can show this. Oh, this is so cool. What a great technique. Aren't the cocaine buyers supporting child sex traffickers? Yeah, frequently they're the same people. This is why they're cartels. And moving drugs versus moving people, this is a matter of profit. This is all about money. I have a bag of cocaine. I earn one time when that bag of cocaine moves. If I'm a distributor, I sell it to the street traffic or the street dealers, and I get my cash from them, and that's it. If I'm a dealer, I hand out the baggie of whatever to you, and you give me the cash. It's one time. A human being, especially if I get them when they're a kid, a human being can produce decades of cash. When you start looking up how much money you can make off the abuse of a child, I've seen estimates at $300,000 to $500,000 US per year. Now, I want you to think of what has to happen to take a human being under the age of 18 and to produce $30,000 to $50,000 from that person. Now, as an adult, you're talking about an amount of money that's to be a law partner or to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. You can make that kind of money. You can be a pretty good defenseman on a U.S. professional hockey team. Could make $500,000 in your first year plus. But how do you do that when you're a 10-year-old? Nothing nice, right? So a lot of these cartels, as we have cracked down on more and more production of chemicals, they've gotten into moving human beings for labor and other unsavory things. And it is very, very profitable. And once you have public corruption wrapped up, where you are bribing the judges, bribing the police officers, bribing the elected officials, once you have a network that allows you to get away with things in certain courts, you can, the corrupt people you own and have compromised don't really care whether you're being caught for cocaine or for moving kids, as long as it doesn't impact them, as long as it's being covered up, and they're not going to have to face the political backlash of covering for child traffickers. So these drug trafficking organizations have become human trafficking organizations. That's why Sinaloa is not just in weed, ecstasy, cocaine, heroin, and then add fentanyl to all that. They also move people for illegal labor at meat packing plants or stuff with kids. So, great question. Aren't the cocaine buyers supporting the child traffickers? They're often the same folks. Let's see. The first navies were created to combat slavers raiding their shores and stealing their kids. They often traded drugs as well as children. The Barbary Pirates. That's right. That is exactly why the U.S. built boats. We don't like you messing with it. Was Thomas Jefferson was in France first, and had heard about the Barbary Pirates taking over shipping lanes, and they were selling people, selling hashish and all this stuff. And one of our very first missions with the United States military as a young nation was to go kick the crap out of the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean. And that's why there's a name check to the shores of Tripoli in the Marine Corps hymn, I believe. So let's see. Our man Neil says, hence why so many are worried that the Trump administration are taking out drug running boats. Yeah. All the compassion for the drug running people is pretty hard to explain away. Jeremy Corbyn, who, I'm not going to call these people leftists. I do like this. I got to say, I'm really enjoying the framework of this swamp, because corruption knows no political direction. Left, right, center, it doesn't matter. Are you a liar who hurts people, or do you set up really terrible social systems? That's the swamp. I like the framework. It takes longer to do all this stuff because the judicial system is paid by the same cartels for the other swampy characters. I hesitate to make the characterizations of an entire judiciary, state and federal, and I only know the U.S. system. I really don't know the Canadian or Mexican or British system at all. Certainly not the French system. It's very complicated. But yeah, corruption at the judicial level does happen, and once you own a judge, what do you do with them? You know what I'm saying? Let's see. More questions here. We're the pirates now. I don't know. I'm not inclined to feel all that much sympathy for the people running narcotics to our country, given how many people have been dying, and the amount of fentanyl that they keep catching in this country is enough to kill like all of Texas at once, like in a single stop. They're very close to where I lived in St. Louis. There was a pickup at a local gas station that was enough to kill 6 million people. That's the entire population of Missouri. And the guy had, I believe, Mexican license plates on it. Like they weren't even trying. This is a few years back. The cartels really got way up into the Midwest. It was a real problem. So much going on. So let us get into the story of Venezuela. Speaking of drug boats, speaking of everything, Venezuela is in the news right now, and what a crazy period of time. I think it was Rep. Carlos Gutierrez, I think, put out this helpful map of some of our U.S. naval assets. I have to be completely honest. I never take these that seriously. The exact position of our military assets at any given time is generally a matter of national security. It is classified, but yeah, we moved a whole lot of boats in here. And up in Puerto Rico right now, we moved the EA-18 Growlers, electronic warfare planes. That's the kind of thing that we would use to jam surface-to-air missiles if we're going to do a serious strike. And it's serious because the Green Mountain Boys, Vermont's own Air Force, has relocated to Puerto Rico. And I met some of those guys not long ago who are the F-35 drivers. They're very, very serious dudes. And our wing here has been chasing off bad guys since the 80s, flying up to the polar caps to go give the Soviets what for. Now they're down in Puerto Rico, and south. They're usually the Green Mountain Boys since 1775 have not been messing around. Tonight's no different. But here, Venezuela appears to be exposed right now as the center of of sort of a global network of bad stuff aimed at the United States, but also elsewhere. And it's a very exciting day because Maria Corina Machado, who is recognized by this country and several others as the rightful president of Venezuela, she was exfiltrated spy style through apparently 10 military blockades, wearing a wig. I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie Argo with Ben Affleck, about the true story of Tony Mendez, CIA officer who went in and dressed up a bunch of diplomats who were stuck at the Canadian embassy, dressed them up as Canadian filmmakers, and they made a Star Wars ripoff. They actually launched in Los Angeles with a movie studio that was on CIA payroll called Argo, and they pretended like they were searching for potential locations to shoot this film. And they knew that there were so many Iranian agents in Los Angeles that if they didn't have a real film with agents calling in actors and actresses, if they didn't have a script, if they weren't really making a movie, that there was no way anyone would believe it. So they concocted this story. They flew the CIA's exfiltration specialist, a guy named Tony Mendez, who won the Intelligence Star, the highest honor they have, for getting into the Canadian embassy, dressing these guys up and preparing them with entire backstories to get out past the guards at the airport and fly out. It's an amazing movie if you've never seen it. Apparently they did that with this woman who was stuck in Venezuela. She's been recognized as the rightful president, and I think the thought was, if we did anything too rough to the Maduro regime, they'd kill her. And she apparently put on a wig, went past 10 checkpoints, and flew out dressed as a diplomat. And it worked. And she is accepting the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. This is crazy stuff, people. This is happening like right today. So I got a film clip of her, and she is telling all the secrets about what's really going on in Venezuela. And I
answered, Venezuela has been.
I couldn't be more pleased with this.
Some people talk about invasion in Venezuela, the threat of an invasion in Venezuela, and I answered, Venezuela has been already invaded. We have the Russian agents, we have the Iranian agents, we have terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, operating freely in accordance with the regime. We have the Colombian guerrilla, the drug cartels that have taken over 60% of our populations, and not only involved in drug trafficking, but in human trafficking, in networks of prostitution. So this has turned Venezuela into the criminal hub of the Americas. And what sustained the regime is a very powerful and funded, strongly funded repression system. Where does that funds come from? Well, from drug trafficking, from the black market of oil, from arms trafficking, for human trafficking. We need to cut those flows. And once it happens and repression is weakened, it's over, because that's the only thing the regime has left, violence and terror. So we ask the international community to cut those sources, because the other regimes that support Maduro and the criminal structure are very active and had turned Venezuela into the safe haven for their.
Well, I don't think I could love that anymore. So what's really going on in Venezuela? It's not just Venezuela, it's Russian agents, it's Iranian agents, and Hamas and Hezbollah and drug trafficking, and it's all running out of there. Now, let's go back to the dewy slopes of, I think, March of this year. And Trump comes out and he invokes something that I don't think had been there since the John Adams administration, the Alien Enemies Act, that would allow us to deport forcibly anybody who was here trained up as a military force who was just planning an assault on our shores. And they invoked this particularly against a group called Tren de Aragua, which was born out of the Aragua prison system in Venezuela. Now, what separates Tren de Aragua and MS-13 or Sinaloa, Jalisco, or any of those is that they are under the direct orders of a government structure. That would be the Maduro regime. They trained as a paramilitary. So these are not just gangbangers. And by the way, do not sleep on Sinaloa, Jalisco, Michoacan, Caballeros Templados, all them. The MS-13 guys are scary. But they are not necessarily trained to military standards. There's a difference. But the thing is that they are being given tasks and orders and operations given to them by a foreign government. And that's why the Trump administration invoked the Alien Enemies Act, which then some of the judges in the United States were like, hold on, we're not sure. You can't just do it. Well, those are probably just regular migrants, though the intelligence says very much otherwise. Well, here we have now, horse's mouth, we have Maria Corina Machado, who is being feted by the world community. She's there in Oslo to receive the Nobel Peace Prize for galvanizing the resistance against Maduro. And she comes out and she goes, this is not about this one guy. This is about the Iranians. This is about the Russians and everything. This is like Hamas, Hezbollah. This is all one group of bad guys. And we need to take the Maduro regime out because of it. Oh, and all the flows of money, which includes the oil. There's some questions about, well, why would we be seizing an oil boat? Well, what's one major difference between petroleum and cocaine? Almost all of you have used petroleum recently. Relatively fewer of you out there, myself included, have used cocaine recently. Maybe if you're like me, you've never used cocaine or heroin or anything else. But you can't get away from petroleum. Petroleum is something that yes, I understand you may have a Tesla Roadster, but you still drove on a road that was basically paved with petroleum. And every car you're out there with, and that, the vehicles that brought the food to your grocery store, they're fueled with petroleum, right? So petroleum on the black market still has a lot of market share. It has a lot of demand because we all use petroleum. So, and this is where stuff is going to get fascinating, and we got a lot to talk about. We're talking about Iran. So, what happened in 1979 when they seized? Going back to the movie Argo now, when they seized all those diplomats and created this, international incident of historic proportions. What happened? Well, yes, there was the October surprise where magically the Reagan administration just happens to secure their release with the help of fairy godmothers. Who could it be? We sanctioned Iran, which has, I think, either the number one or number two source of easy to access crude oil. There's places that have vast reserves that might be under ice cap, but very difficult to get to. Iran, it's very easy to get to their petroleum. Since 1979, 1980, we have had Iran under sanctions because of their regime. Well, that black market oil is worth a lot. And that money has been going through money laundering networks throughout the world for decades. I know this is one of my areas of expertise. And that Iranian oil money turns up everywhere. Venezuela is trafficking not just its own petroleum. Yes, it makes its own petroleum. But if you go and take a little sample of some of what comes out of their boats, it's Iranian. That's why they have such a relationship with the Iranians. So this is really that oil goes into money that becomes the lifeblood of all these bad acts. That money is then, turned into cash or Bitcoin or whatever, and it gets sent to extremists in Nigeria or slavers in Uzbekistan or Hamas, Hezbollah. It's all one group of bad guys. And between the petroleum in Venezuela, the illegal gold mining, they drag a lot of gold out of the dirt in Venezuela. I think they use slave labor for most of this. These guys don't like just one set of crimes. They once they're violating human rights, they like to violate all of it. They take that out, and I think Venezuela does between $2 and $4 billion a year in illegal gold, which can get melted down to other parts of the world and becomes another illicit network of money that then goes to finance bribes, politicians, terrorist operations, espionage, political interference. So it's very possible that the Venezuelan gold has gone to pay bot farms to harass people on Twitter. Sure, that's how they do that kind of thing. So here we are cracking down on Venezuela as kind of one of the main regional threats to the United States because they do all this crap. And Maria Corina Machado is out there. She's calling balls and strikes, people. She's like, this is terrorist financing. They're doing it through drug trafficking. They're doing it through human trafficking. Also, the democracy is a sham. So I think replacing Maduro, Trump has given Maduro a very limited time window to get out of the country and let this woman take over so that we can end that whole network of Chinese, Russian, Iranian bad guy stuff going on. And I'd like to point out, especially since it is the 9th anniversary of game theory, that boy, for being a Putin puppet, Trump is sure giving the Russians a hard time here in our hemisphere. He's also like doubled the amount of spending in NATO over, pointed towards Ukraine there. He sometimes plays good cop and not bad cop when he's doing it. But, there were a lot of Russian assets who were around Trump that made him look like he was one too. I know. I was lobbing those very accusations. Boy, it looks different now, and joyously so. There's no question Maduro is part of the same network as Evo Morales in Bolivia or the regime in Cuba and North Korea for that matter, and they're all tied into Russia. And Trump is putting massive pressure on that whole network. So it's very exciting stuff here. Our friend Tamara Harpster, Sablewing, says plastics and other uses as well for petroleum. There's a lot of money involved in the oil business. Absolutely. Now think of the implications of moving to solar and wind, where you don't have just a few countries that have access to this money. You can create your own power source and it can't be choked off. It comes from the sky and not the dirt. You're talking about really shutting down on a whole network of money that goes to bribe politicians and make sure that we have really bad decisions made in our name in democracies. So yeah, getting off of petroleum is not just about being ecologically sound, it's being democratically sound as well. So how about that for your left-wing progressive stuff? It's like there's so many reasons to get off petroleum beyond the ones that get talked about. Helix Fire says, hi from Revere, Mass. Hello down there in Massachusetts there. Well, Revere out by the airport. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do your accent that much. How the heck are we going to get the world to trust the USA again? That's a really good question. I think we just need to do good things for people. You know, the United States is a mixed bag. And one of the themes that's going to come up here is I can cover another side story here that I'm very interested in. I don't know if any of you noticed a story, I think it was last Friday. Former senior DEA official indicted for conspiring to provide material support to foreign terrorist organization. So Paul Campbell, the former DEA official, and his friend, the extraordinarily interesting Robert Sensi, agreed to launder approximately $12 million and participate in narcotics trafficking for the Jalisco cartel, which is very, very, very awkward for a DEA official to be working for the Jaliscos, right? But his friend Robert Sensi, what an interesting dude that was. I tell you, I'm not certain where I got this graphic from. I think I got it from a Twitter friend, but Sensi used to work for the DEA himself, and he's widely reputed former Washington sales manager for Kuwait Airways, and he's in some way affiliated with the CIA. Sensi apparently was reportedly part of the network that was somewhere connecting the Iranians and the Contras in the 80s. And when you get to a lot of our current problems, there you'll find this Iran-Contra thing that keeps coming up, right? So when Trump had his first impeachment, he had these very interesting defense attorneys, such as Ed Meese, who used to be Attorney General under Reagan. And Meese was in charge of a number of things that kind of stick with us, such as the exfiltration of PROMIS software. It's the prosecutor's management information system that created a single database of criminal counterintelligence and tax investigations between the FBI, the DOJ, and the IRS. So if you wanted a system that could unify your view of all the spies and mobsters all over the United States at the same time, this PROMIS software that was invented in the 70s, that was the way to do it. And in the early 80s, you had the Reagan Justice Department decided to cut off the money to PROMIS, and then they went bankrupt, and then their software was sold as part of the bankruptcy, as part of one of the assets that needed to be turned over to creditors, and it was then exfiltrated to foreign countries by a guy named Robert Maxwell. You may have remembered his son-in-law, Jeffrey Epstein. So Ed Meese was part of the crew that covered up the exfiltration of PROMIS software. Also, recently you've had John Bolton, who, of course, took a leading role in selling the fake Iraq war to everybody. And Bolton just caught 20 or so, 15 anyhow, espionage charges for what he did during Trump's first administration. Now, there's a lot of people who've tried to spin that as, oh, well, he was a vicious critic of Trump, which means he can commit all the espionage he wants. That's no problem. But, okay, let's rewind. Where did Bolton really get his start? In the Reagan DOJ, he was working for Ed Meese, advising the Reagan administration on how to cover up the Iran-Contra stuff to make sure they didn't have to brief Congress on it. So there's, for those of you who are feeling old, like, you know, I'm north of the age of 50, so I can make lots of middle-aged dude comments. There is so much stuff in our lives from when we were like little kids. For, you know, around the time we were watching Sesame Street, there is stuff that we are dealing with just now, that we are just getting to. These people are just now getting prosecuted. And it seems to be a particularly virulent bunch around the DEA and the CIA who may have been using drug cartels to finance off-book stuff for the Central Intelligence Agency. I mean, I feel like this is a magical moment where every conspiracy theorist on earth is going to have the greatest day, along with that know-it-all super liberal dude in your college philosophy class who's like, man, it's the CIA. It's like, what if everybody's right about all the various conspiracy theories? What if it's all true? We may be coming up to that kind of moment here, because I kick over a rock and I look and it's the CIA, and it's certain elements of the DEA, and it's the Reagan administration. It's the people that tried to sabotage Jimmy Carter. Basically, we haven't solved any of the problems. We just pile more of the problems on top of each other, and now we're coming out, and maybe we're going to start finally digging out. Who knows? Our man Raj says, I met Ed Meese in the early 90s at Stanford, Junior Statesman of America program. Many questions about the people paraded before us. More than a few of my peers oddly ended up as billionaires. That is odd, right? So the stuff that happened in the 90s still with us, like this is what happens when we never said we just kind of pile stuff on. Tamara says it feels like technology that has been used to try and control us is now turning and exposing things that have been hidden too long. What a wonderful day to revisit on the 9th anniversary of today. As it was told to me that one of the problems they encountered, the people that were trying to use social media were not intending intelligence personnel who might not have a clearance at that very moment to just start yapping. Like, they weren't expecting that we were going to use this social media that was supposed to, really, I think we were supposed to get on there on Facebook and, be friends with all our friends from 7th grade, and then just disappoint each other. And then they would have all these bots and they would control our opinions. They were not expecting that we would all talk to each other, listen to each other, teach each other, and encourage each other to go out and go, hey, I found this note. What do you have any more details on that? And social media was supposed to keep us separate and staring at our old pictures from when we were 15, and it was not supposed to create a bunch of allied professionals who were going to talk to each other about substantive matters. So yeah, funny joke on them, huh? Let's see. Corporate Dems don't help the oil situation. I don't really have a comment on that. I just think I think it's probably correct and something that needs visiting here. I'm gonna check Twitter just to see if we get any folks from the old network there. Our friend Sari Bell, one of our favorites, she says, I'm obsessing over the Diddy case, and I assumed he was recording everything for blackmail purposes, similar to what Epstein did. What are your thoughts? That is always great to hear from you. And I don't have a specific thought about whether Sean Combs was using it to blackmail people. I would be kind of surprised if he weren't. Something to remember about Combs' dad was the wheelman, I think body man, to Frank Lucas. They made the movie American Gangster about him with Denzel Washington, and I think they omitted the fact that his driver was Sean Puffy Combs' father. So Diddy comes from a very powerful cartel background, and he, I think, was involved with at least one transnational group, if not multiple. And his prosecution was kind of oddly limited, but I don't want to throw water on it, because this is a dude who was, at least in some technical sense, a billionaire. And we have a lot of people who aren't just wealthy, who are not just CEOs, because CEO can mean a wide range of net worth. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean how much money you have, liquid or otherwise. But we're talking about, there is a number of people who are very high net worth individuals I think is Howie S. They recently prosecuted a guy who was one of George Soros's top bankers, and I think he's a B billionaire. They hit him with sex trafficking charges because he was flying in women, consenting adults, mind you. This is a very important prosecution. He was flying these women to New York, where he was engaged in this BDSM type stuff, where, according to the charging documents, he was exceeding their consent. He was going well beyond what they had agreed to. And so the DOJ, this DOJ, is prosecuting him for sex trafficking and other abuses. Now, sure, the Soros people have been above the right wing for a long time. So if you want to see this through a partisan lens, you might say, oh, they're going after the Soros people, and this is scandalous. Although there are plenty of reports to local prosecutors who declined to prosecute in the New York area for reasons I guess they'd have to explain. But a couple things that I find super remarkable. One, this guy has an amount of money that normally allows you to get away with this kind of conduct. But second of all, these are sex workers. These people are not generally afforded lots of rights by local prosecutors for things that happen to them as part of their employment, which are just felonious as if they happen to anybody else. But the way our society is run, if you agree to this one thing that may be not legal, then you apparently agree to all these other things that happen to you. But that is not the stance of this DOJ. And the prosecution is based on this offender allegedly violated the extent of their consent, that they gave so much consent and he went past that, and he needs to answer the law in one of the most intense ways. We have people who normally get away with this kind of behavior who are finally not getting away with it. I find it pretty exciting. Which I think that is a good entree to what's going on with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, a couple weeks back, there was a certain limited number of documents that were released by Congress that showed the depth of Jeffrey Epstein's connections to certain individuals. One in particular, former president of Harvard, former Clinton administration Treasury official, former Obama administration National Economic Council official, Larry Summers. And within a short period of time here, he stepped back from his teaching at Harvard, and Larry got thrown out of economics altogether. I didn't know you could get banned from economics. I'm banned by Russia. Larry's banned by economics. The American Economic Association accepted Lawrence H. Summers' voluntary resignation from membership. Yeah, apparently hanging out with a child trafficker is really hard on your reputation, which good, seems overall pretty positive. And of course, Congress is now passed, and Donald Trump has signed into law the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And I saw it from yesterday. I saw there was an order from Judge Berman's courtroom in the Southern District of New York. And I wanted to talk about this because I want to hip everybody. I want to hip everybody to what you might be seeing, but particularly what you will not be seeing if I understand this correctly. As an overview, I gather that you've got grand juries in New York and Florida, and they might have different stuff. It seems like the grand juries in New York, some of the judges are saying, yeah, you're not going to see that much from this. However, the declined prosecution of Epstein in 2007, which led to his sweetheart deal from Alex Acosta, who then became Secretary of Labor under Trump in his first round, that may be very interesting. But for right now, we've got these orders that are coming out to release these files, and everyone is online. Release the files. We want to see everything. And just sorry, I'm going to backtrack here. I want everyone to remember what Jeffrey Epstein's career was. So he gets hired by Donald Barr, who's the father of William Barr, who ends up as Attorney General under George H.W. Bush, where he goes to cover up the Promise Inslaw affair, that software I was just telling you about, the prosecutor software that unified all the counterintelligence, tax, and criminal charges that got exfiltrated through Robert Maxwell to Libya and the Soviet Union and Israel and China, and anyone that wanted a copy of it, they got a copy of this. That would tell these bad guys what the status of our prosecutions were and all in this country for spy stuff and for the mob and where they overlapped. I mean, it's just, you wonder how this country functioned after something like that. It's really crazy stuff. That dude's the dude who was covering up for the Inslaw stuff. His dad hired Epstein to begin with to teach at the Dalton School, which is an elite school in New York City. And Epstein didn't have a teaching license, to my knowledge, and he didn't graduate from college, and he was teaching physics and mathematics. Okay. Donald Barr worked for the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which is the predecessor to the CIA. He leaves the Dalton School. He goes to Bear Stearns, where he's making money, though nobody, I think, has ever had a record of any of the transactions that Jeffrey Epstein ever made. Like, Warren Buffett, everybody knows that he traded Coca-Cola stock and railroads, and he made trades, and he talked about them. And you can kind of, there's questions about Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, but he has kind of an inexplicable career. Whereas Epstein, nobody really knows what that dude traded. He just ended up with like $1 billion. Okay. So he's at Bear Stearns, and he leaves Bear Stearns, and he goes to work. He opens a boutique practice that finds money offshore, which is a real trick, I can tell you, as a professional in the field. He has one secretary and no staff. He starts working for Adnan Khashoggi, the arms trafficker who was involved in some of the Iran-Contra stuff, right? And then later on, Epstein gets involved with Bear Stearns with blowing up our mortgage markets in the 2000s. And then right around that time, he gets nailed. They're looking into his potential criminal acts in the federal courts, but also in the state courts in Florida. And there's an agreement that is made with Epstein and the prosecutors that he'll plead to a state charge of soliciting a minor for prostitution, and the feds will lay off of him. And I believe that the feds agree not to prosecute any of his co-conspirators for like anything. And I want to go back to the fact that this is a dude that emerges. He gets hired to be around the children of the elites by a guy who was intelligence, who really doesn't have any way to explain why this guy and not somebody else. He gets out in the 80s. He starts in all this financial racketeering stuff. He somehow knows his way around offshore money. After her dad, Robert Maxwell, the multinational spy, dies suddenly in a yachting accident in 1991, Ghislaine Maxwell comes to New York State and immediately gets in a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. They immediately start trafficking all these children. And it's not until 2019 that the whole operation gets wrapped up. He is incarcerated. He dies right away. His body's, to my knowledge, we don't know where he's buried. There's some espionage stuff in there. Like, if that doesn't sound like spy stuff, I don't know what to do for you. Like, he was hired by an intelligence guy from the time he was a young man, and he basically hung out with nobody but spies. That's what he did, like, all the time. So now we have some orders to release this grand jury stuff, and I want to give you a little bit of a tour here. So The Epstein Files Transparency Act compels the US DOJ to make public by December 19th, that's a week from tomorrow, certain evidentiary files. Now, you have to protect the identity of the victims, which is good practice, I think. So the grand jury materials here, there's a particular word that I want to hip you guys to. The act requires disclosure of Epstein grand jury materials by requiring disclosure of all unclassified records, documents, communication, and investigative materials. Protective order materials, under B here, the clear language of the act requires the Attorney General, blah, blah, blah. The act requires disclosure of all unclassified records. So I want to set expectations for everyone here. This is a dude who I believe, what did he have? Was it an Austrian passport in Saudi Arabia? Epstein had multiple passports, and dude was a spy. Is my point. He was clearly the linchpin between certainly Mossad. Probably had more than a couple dalliances with KGB. Those are the major teams in the circuit of espionage. In other words, a lot of stuff about Jeffrey Epstein is going to be classified, and that probably still needs to be classified. Now, I think we're getting to a place now where less stuff is going to be classified. If, we're going to reveal the depth and potency of certain malign networks around the world. It may be very complicated for certain people, because hell, you might have entire democracies where the people who are elected officials were supported by bad guys. And how much do you want, let's say the government of Spain, France, Netherlands, Canada, US, whoever, is there as the result of operations by bad guy networks? How do you just reveal that? There's a lot of political pressure not to say those things. So that might be an issue for this Epstein stuff anyhow. And I threw up the most recent news about our friend Larry Summers there. I mean, who is a terrible public official who almost single-handedly led to the collapse of the mortgage markets, among other things that he's done. You see where connection to Jeffrey Epstein, he's out of his career. He's done. I think he should have been out a long time ago. That's my personal opinion. But who Epstein is connected to, and I am told that his networks in Manhattan alone, like, he is tied to more of the people that run this country than anybody wants to talk about, because that dude was gross. And by, almost 20 years ago, everybody knew he trafficked children, and they still hung out with him because he could do things for them, and they're selfish. To them, this is just how the world works. You have to deal with some child traffickers. That's the stuff that's not necessarily classified. That's before we get to the malign networks that are espionage based and that are about the trafficking of technique. What was Jeffrey Epstein into? He was into knowing as many scientists and elite intellectuals as possible, knowing what they were working on at any given time. And if he's anything like his former father-in-law, Robert Maxwell, selling it to bad guys. That stuff is probably going to be classified. Now, we have some original declassifiers. We have President of the United States. We have the director of the CIA, who seems to hew pretty closely to the President of the United States and what he wants. A lot of that could get declassified. And who knows? It's another 8 days before that goes out. There could be some wild stuff that gets declassified. I don't even know what's possible, but I just want to set expectations there and say, hey, this could be a whole long list of bad guys that we all throw in the trash and move on and have much better people in charge of society. That could actually be very optimistic. Or it could be, a few sacrificial lambs here and there. and a lot of it could stay under wraps. I don't know, but I'll narrate it for you when it happens. I'm kind of excited to see where it goes. Now, the last topic I wanted to get into, speaking of revelation here, was the prosecution of James Comey. For some of us, we're watching this going, I don't know. They don't have their whole heart in it. Like, it seemed like it was a very amateur prosecution of Jim Comey. And I did a video on this channel about the CIA's role with the Steele dossier. Comey's role in 2016 and 2017 is fascinating. I have not got the whole thing figured out. Maybe even less so this year. But Comey does not seem to have gone along with the Steele dossier fraud the way that former Director of National Intelligence Jim Clapper and former Director of CIA John Brennan did. And they've tried to gotcha Comey in the same way that they've done this with Brennan. With Brennan, his potential prosecution, which is imminent, is open and shut. He told Congress that the CIA had nothing to do with it, and that was just a lie, flat out. He left Congress, so he's ready to prosecute. It's within a 5-year time bar. Boom, they can drop the hammer. It's done. In fact, if I had to guess, the indictment is already sealed on Brennan. They're just waiting on it. Comey's another matter here. Now, so Comey, they jammed in this woman, Lindsay Halligan, at the Eastern District of Virginia, which of course is where all the espionage was prosecuted. And she was a former insurance attorney who had no prosecutorial experience. And when he got prosecuted through her, it was so dodgy. I said, are they just trying to topside some more information? And I recommend the videos of Kyle over Just Human. His channel's just taken off. I think he has criminally under 1,000 viewers. He's doing great excavation on this material. But I've got something to add to the pile here on the dismissal of the Comey indictment. It just makes me wonder, it's so bad. It was done so poorly that I wonder if it wasn't a kindness to Mr. Comey. So, slide 17. So this is from the 24th, a couple weeks ago. Opinion and order granting motion to dismiss the indictment. And dismissing an entire indictment's a big deal. I mean, that would say that the government really messed up in how it presented the whole thing. But here's the order. Lindsay Halligan, former White House aide with no prior prosecutorial experience at arguably the most important district in all of the U.S. Attorney's offices there. Having been appointed interim U.S. Attorney by the Attorney General just days before, she secured a 2-count indictment charging former FBI Director Jim Comey. I mean, he's a funny guy to have be your first criminal prosecution ever, right? It's like going straight at the head of the FBI is a bit much, right? So Comey moved the court that it should dismiss the indictment because Halligan was unlawfully appointed in violation of 28 U.S. Code, Section 546, and the Constitution's Appointments Clause. And I'm not an expert in the Appointments Clause, but Comey won this one, and it's the indictment has been dismissed, and apparently they're not going to refile another one. And the evidence gathered on his friend Richmond is off limits to any other prosecutor. So Comey is going to get away with whatever he may have done, or he's not going to have to face any of this. And when I read this, it was so fascinating about how badly this was done. It seems improbable to me that it wasn't intentional. It's my personal conspiracy theory. I'll share it with you right now. So for U.S. attorneys, Congress has preserved the constitutional default role of presidential appointment and Senate confirmation. So with the U.S. attorney in general, you have to have the Senate confirm them. They do a regular application. You can do an interim U.S. attorney. Usually this happens, there's 120 days, particularly after one president is outgoing and there's a new one coming in. They leave somebody as an interim U.S. attorney to prosecute in that district. Eastern District of Michigan, Arizona, Vermont, Western District of Missouri, what have you, until somebody can be appointed by the Congress, and there are emergency appointments. But anyhow, you get 120 days of an interim, and then after that, it goes to the district court to appoint a prosecutor until they can get one past the Senate. So you had Eric Siebert as interim U.S. attorney, who was lawfully appointed under 28 U.S.C. 456 or 546. Sorry, it was set to expire on May 21st, and Siebert had expressed concerns about charging Mr. Comey because Comey's indictment. Comey's indictment was apparently a dispute between what he said versus what Andy McCabe said under oath, and the prosecution seems to have presumed that McCabe was telling the truth, and thus Comey was not. So they're like, "Ha! You were obviously lying because we heard from this other guy," which is not a great foundation for making a false statement. Anyhow, so you had Lindsay Halligan was made U.S. attorney on the 22nd of September of this year, a couple months ago. And this right after a very obvious political tweet from Trump. So setting up the case that we eventually of malicious prosecution, the political basis for the prosecution, not the law, all this. Trump just fell right into that trap, didn't he? And Halligan, 3 days into her life as a prosecutor, goes down and gets a 2-count indictment against Mr. Comey. Apparently, a grand jury was sitting there, and she was the only prosecutor, meaning she hadn't had 2 days to find out where the water cooler was at the Eastern District of Virginia, much less get up to speed on whatever the case against the director of the FBI had been. And so anyway, she was illegally in there, and it should have been somebody appointed by the court. So her appointment was legal, and I guess that's it. They dismissed the indictment against Comey, and now they're trying to do it again, and it looks like they're not going to do it. I don't know. How very nice for Director Comey that the Trump White House messed this up so very badly that it just exposed a lot of the evidence that may have come up. That may, when evidence goes to a grand jury, it might be about other individuals. Who knows? Maybe they sealed indictments against those individuals as well. But Comey seems like he's going to walk away from this one. I don't know. It's so sloppy. What a friendly gesture on. I'm sure it's an accident. If you want a more detailed and less snark and innuendo heavy analysis of it, like I said, Kyle at Just Human, he's doing great videos. He's really getting into it. So I'm gonna get go get more substance from his stuff. But I'm interested in the Steele dossier type prosecutions here, and it seems like Comey's not going to be involved in that one. It seems like he was on a different team than some of those guys. I guess we'll find out. But I'm not disturbed, as you can tell by my mannerisms here. So I got some more questions here, and we're going to call it for this live stream. This has been a great success, and so many of you have joined. I'm just very, very pleased. So thank you. Can they prosecute the Trump administration for illegally putting Halligan in there? Prosecution. There could be a 42 U.S. Code 1985 suit, conspiracy against rights. If there was a joint conspiracy to prosecute Comey, that he might get a civil judgment out of that. If there was, I think there is, I'm not sure about what the legal limits are here. I think there's prosecutorial discretion on this, and as prosecutor, Lindsay Halligan gets to decide who she wants to prosecute. Now, apparently she didn't have the skills to do it very well, but she gets official immunity And I believe that that's absolute in terms of civil suits. And she would have to do something like an off-bench, sorry, would be for judges. It would have to be something that is not intimately related to the judicial process. So for anything that involves her bringing the charges against Comey, as long as that involved the grand jury and stuff she got from DOJ and FBI and everybody else, she is immune from civil suit, and I think she's highly unlikely to be prosecuted criminally. If she went to a parking lot and they decided to make a forgery of Comey's signature to affix to a document, that's not considered part of the judicial process, and it would not be immune from civil suit or from criminal prosecution. If they did something that egregious, like if there are other crimes involved, then that would overcome the immunity against suit. So Comey could get millions of dollars from them, or they could go to prison. Short of that, the Trump administration is covered, and it may just have been that they dredged up a lot of evidence about people around Comey that did some criminal stuff, and we'll have to see. It's fascinating times to have these kinds of events be all at once, like be in the headlines. I mean, I think a FBI director has ever been criminally charged. You had William Sessions, he was kicked out by Clinton. There have been scandals, but there's never been criminal charges to my knowledge. Here with the criminal charges, they've now been dismissed. Crazy times. The news from left, right, and center are not good for the Trump government. If the U.S. is doing good, it's not covered enough. I don't think we have good news in general. I don't think we have high quality news in general. I think we have a lot of our corporate media that does narrative generation. That doesn't necessarily have to do with how we're doing. We can't even decide whether or not there's inflation, right? Like, so did prices go up under the Biden administration, which it kind of seems they did, or did they not? I think we don't really even have the I don't think we have the quality to get at that. That's why people like me are running their own equivalent of the news here. Mediaopoly. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. Do one more check of the Twitters. It is looking pretty clear there. That is all for tonight. It was a lovely experiment. Thank you so much for being with me, and hit me up on Twitter or in the comments here on what you want to see covered, what you want to know more of, and I'll do it because I'm like that, and I appreciate you, and I thank you, and we will do this again sometime. Game 3 out.